about a nice book, said Ron innocently. No, I don't think so, said Hermione composedly. I really want an owl. I mean, Harry's got Hedwig and you've got Errol. I haven't, said Ron. Errol's a family owl. All I've got is Scabbers. He pulled his pet rat out of his pocket. And I want to get him checked over, he added, placing Scabbers on the table in front of them. I don't think Egypt agreed with him. Scabbers was looking thinner than usual, and there was a definite droop to his whiskers. There's a magical creatures shop just over there, said Harry, who knew Diagon Alley very well by now. You can see if they've got anything for Scabbers, and Hermione can get her owl. So they paid for their ice creams and crossed the street to the magical menagerie. There wasn't much room inside. Every inch of wall was hidden by cages. It was smelly and very noisy because the occupants of these cages were all squeaking, squawking, jabbering, and hissing. The witch behind the counter was already advising a wizard on the care of double-ended newts. So Harry, Ron, and Hermione waited, examining the cages. A pair of enormous purple toads sat gulping wetly and feasting on dead blowflies. A gigantic tortoise with a jewel-encrusted shell was glittering near the window. Poisonous orange snails were oozing slowly up the side of their glass tank, and a fat white rabbit kept changing into a silk top hat and back again with a loud popping noise. Then there were cats of every color, a noisy cage of ravens, and a basket of funny custard-colored furballs that were humming loudly, and on the counter a vast cage of sleek black rats which were playing some sort of skipping game and using their long bald tails. The double-ended newt wizard left, and Ron approached the counter. It's my rat, he told the witch. He's been a bit off colour ever since I brought him back from Egypt. Bang him on the counter, said the witch, pulling a pair of heavy black spectacles out of her pocket. Ron lifted Scabbers out of his inside pocket and placed him next to the cage of his fellow rats, who stopped their skipping tricks and scuffled to the wire for a better look. Like nearly everything Ron owned, Scabbers the rat was second-hand. He had belonged to Ron's brother Percy, and was a bit battered. Next to the glossy rats in the cage, he looked especially woebegone. Said the witch, picking Scabbers up. How old is this rat? Dunno, said Ron. Quite old. He used to belong to my brother. What powers does he have? Said the witch, examining Scabbers closely. Said Ron. The truth was that Scabbers had never shown the faintest trace of interesting powers. The witch's eyes moved from Scabbers' tattered left ear to his front paw, which had a toe missing, and tutted loudly. He's been through the mill, this one, she said, and he was like that when Percy gave him to me, said Ron defensively. An ordinary common or garden rat like this can't be expected to live longer than 3 years or so, said the witch. Now, if you were looking for something a bit more hard-wearing, you might like one of these. She indicated the black rats, who promptly started skipping again. Ron muttered, show-offs. Well, if you don't want a replacement, you can try this rat tonic, said the witch, reaching under the counter and bringing out a small red bottle. Okay, said Ron. How much? Ouch! Ron buckled as something huge and orange came soaring from the top of the highest cage, landed on his head, and then propelled itself, spitting madly at Scabbers. No, Crookshanks, no! Cried the witch, but Scabbers shot from between her hands like a bar of soap, landing splay-legged on the floor and then scarpered. Never heard that word before. Scarpered for the door. Scabbers! Ron shouted, tearing out of the shop after him. Harry followed. It took them nearly 10 minutes to find Scabbers, who had taken refuge under a waste paper bin outside Quality Quidditch Supplies. Ron stuffed the trembling rat back into his pocket and straightened up, massaging his head. What was that? It was either a very big cat or quite a small tiger, said Harry. Where's Hermione? Probably getting her owl. They made their way back up the crowded street to the magical menagerie. As they reached it, Hermione came out, but she wasn't carrying an owl. Her arms were clamped tightly around the enormous ginger cat. "You bought that monster?" said Ron, his mouth hanging open. "He's gorgeous, isn't he?" said Hermione, glowing. That was a matter of opinion, thought Harry. The cat's ginger fur was thick and fluffy, but it was definitely a bit bow-legged, and its face looked grumpy and oddly squashed, as though it had run headlong into a brick wall. Now that Scabbers was out of sight, however, the cat was purring contentedly in Hermione's arms. "Hermione, that thing nearly scalped me," said Ron. "He didn't mean to, did he? Did you, Crookshanks?" said Hermione. "And what about Scabbers?" said Ron, pointing at the lump in his chest pocket. "He needs rest and relaxation. How's he going to get it with that thing around?" "That reminds me, you forgot your rat tonic," said Hermione, slapping the small red bottle into Ron's hands. "And stop worrying. Crookshanks will be sleeping in my dormitory and Scabbers in yours. What's the problem? Poor Crookshanks. That witch says that he's been in there for ages. No one wanted him." "I wonder why," said Ron sarcastically, as they set off towards the leaky cauldron. They found Mr. Weasley sitting in the bar, reading the Daily Prophet. "Harry," he said, smiling as he looked up, "how are you?" "Fine, thanks," said Harry, as he, Ron, and Hermione joined Mr. Weasley with all of their shopping. Mr. Weasley put down his paper, and Harry saw the now familiar picture of Sirius Black staring up at him. "They still haven't caught him, then?" he asked. "No," said Mr. Weasley, looking extremely grave. "They've pulled us all off our regular jobs at the Ministry to try and find him, but no luck so far." "Wouldn't we get a reward if we caught him?" asked Ron. "It'd be good to get some more money." "Don't be ridiculous, Ron," said Mr. Weasley, who on closer inspection looked very strange. "Black's not going to be caught by a 13-year-old wizard. It's the Azkaban guards who will get him back. Mark my words." At that moment, Mrs. Weasley entered the bar, laden with shopping and followed by the twins, Fred and George, who were about to start their 5th year at Hogwarts, the newly elected head boy, Percy, and the Weasleys' youngest child and only girl, Ginny. Ginny had always been very taken with Harry, seemed even more heartily embarrassed than usual when she saw him, perhaps because he had saved her life during their last term at Hogwarts. She went very red and muttered, "Hello," without looking at him. Percy, however, held out his hand solemnly as though he and Harry had never met and said, "Harry, how nice to see you." "Hello, Percy," said Harry, trying not to laugh. "I hope you're well," said Percy pompously, shaking hands. It was rather like being introduced to the mayor. "Very well, thanks." "Harry," said Fred, elbowing Percy out of the way and bowing deeply. "Simply splendid to see you, old boy." "Marvellous," said George, pushing Fred aside, seizing Harry's hand in turn. "Absolutely spiffing." Percy scowled. "That's enough now," said Mrs. Weasley. "Mom," said Fred, as though he'd only just spotted her, and seized her hand too. "How really corking to see you." "I said that's enough," said Mrs. Weasley, depositing her shopping in an empty chair. "Hello, Harry dear. I suppose you've heard our exciting news." She pointed at the brand new silver badge on Percy's chest. "Second head boy in the family," she said, swelling with pride. "And last," Fred muttered under his breath. "I don't doubt that," said Mrs. Weasley, frowning suddenly. "I notice they haven't made you two prefects." "What do we want to be prefects for?" said George, looking revolted at the very idea. "It'd take all the fun out of life." Ginny giggled. "You want to be a better example for your sister," snapped Mrs. Weasley. "Jenny's got other brothers to set an example, Mother," said Percy loftily. "I'm going up to change for dinner." He disappeared, and George heaved a sigh. "We tried to shut him in a pyramid," he told Harry, "but Mum spotted us." Dinner that night was a very enjoyable affair. Tom the innkeeper put 3 tables together in the parlor, and the 7 Weasleys, Harry and Hermione, all ate their way through 5 delicious courses. "How will we get into King's Cross tomorrow, Dad?" asked Fred, as they tucked into a sumptuous chocolate pudding. "The Ministry's providing a couple of cars," said Mr. Weasley. Everyone looked up at him. "Why?" said Percy curiously. "It's because of you, Perce," said George seriously. "And there'll be a little flags on the bonnet with HB on them for humongous big head," said Fred. Everyone except Percy and Mrs. Weasley snorted into their pudding. "Why is the Ministry providing cars, Father?" Percy asked again in a dignified voice. "Well, as we haven't got one anymore, said Mr. Weasley, and as I work there, they're doing me a favour. His voice was casual, but Harry couldn't help noticing that Mr. Weasley's ears had gone red, just like Ron's did when he was under pressure. Good job, too, said Mrs. Weasley briskly. Do you realise how much luggage you've all got between you? A nice sight you'd be on the Muggle Underground. You are all packed, aren't you? Ron hasn't put all his things in his trunk yet, said Percy in a long-suffering voice. He's dumped them on my bed.